Well, hello! Howdy, howdy. Drop this down. Man, Rob, seeing celebrities and stuff downtown? I'm telling you, Charleston's a big city. There's lots of famous people here, so... I probably wouldn't. I don't know a lot of famous people, so... That's Tori. She knows all the famous people. I just, just bask in her glory. Or stand in her shadow, whichever you prefer. Yeah, no. I mean, what are the odds? It's pretty crazy. So, we are... Sorry it's been so long since I've streamed / posted one of these. But we are on the home stretch of Enola Holmes' Case of the Left-Handed Lady. This is brought to you by the Fitchburg Public Library. Withdrawn from the Fitchburg Public Library, but thank you for not throwing it away and putting it on eBay, because it's great. Yeah, I didn't know if you heard me, but I was going to ask if you needed a ride somewhere, because, get sunburnt walking in this heat. So... Yeah, totally. No, I had to take my phone down to the Apple store because my battery life was awful. And just if anybody's watching and has an iPhone, that is, I didn't know this until I started Googling, but if you have an iPhone that's an iPhone 6 or later, if your battery is sucky and has like a bad battery capacity, then you can take it to the Apple store or any like Apple certified seller or whatever, then and get the battery replaced for like $29. So that's what I did because my battery was terrible. So yeah. Yeah, it's not a bad walk. Like it used to be a bad walk. But no, that area is cleaned up really nicely, so it actually is kind of a nice little hike down to the Harris Teeter. And you probably know this, but if you take a right onto Calhoun and go all the way down Calhoun to where it meets King, there's a Walgreens down there. If you need to ever go to a Walgreens for any reason. But yeah, that Walgreens and then the Harris Teeter. As far as like shopping goes, there's a Piggly Wiggly. Is it Piggly Wiggly or a Food Lion? One of the, there's a grocery store back on like King Street, like way Upper King, but that'd probably would be a really far walk for you, and it would be like through very risky parts of town, so I wouldn't recommend it. But you could drive it. You could absolutely drive it. Yeah, the CVS is nice too. So, one second. Yeah, the, one on King, it's like upper King. Like, it's like between King and Morrison. So it's like right when you're getting onto the peninsula. So it's way, further up King than from where you are. Yeah. Some parts, you just gotta be kind of careful. Like, in the daytime, you're probably fine, you wouldn't have any issues, but at night, it's just kind of gets sketchy down there. But yeah. Otherwise, it's fine. It's not a bad part of town, and it's always getting nicer, so you will not have any problems down there. So, I'm asking Tori why she's not here yet, because I told her I was gonna go live, and she's not here. But, oh, your phone never buzzed. Okay, well, welcome. We're glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. I'm sure Rob is glad you're here too, but I'm glad you're here. Because reading to two people is nice. So then you two aren't completely bored the whole time. No, you don't get worst best friend award. You get the best worst friend award. I'm just kidding. That's not a thing. Alrighty. So, we are on the 13th chapter. And I think there are 17 and an epilogue. Yeah, 17 and an epilogue. No, Tori, or Rob, well, you guys are both on Twitch, so you probably know this. But Twitch has changed it to where now you don't get notified. You only get notified on one platform. So it's like, if you have, if you have your browser open, it won't notify your phone that somebody's streaming. It'll only tell you on your browser. Or if you have your phone, you get a phone notification, it's not going to send you an email anymore. So they've changed their, notification stuff, so I guess not to bombard you with information. So, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and get cracking on this. So, Enola Holmes and the case of the left-handed lady. Case of the left-handed lady. Anyways. Oh, thanks for hosting, Riddy. Appreciate it. Yeah. No, I got an email about the whole Twitch thing or something. Yeah, it's odd. Because sometimes I wouldn't get a mobile notification, and so I needed the email to make sure that I knew if someone was streaming. Hi, Riddy. Welcome. I'm just getting started. Okay. Good luck studying, Rob. Good luck printing, Tori. Hi, Riddy. Good luck doing whatever you're doing. Chapter the 13th. The next morning, Ivy Michelle, for the first time since her visit to Baker Street, reported to work without fear. No longer did that worthy secretary need to fret, for Sherlock Holmes did not seek her. He was on the hunt for a poor street vendor who had worn a waterproof. So I felt better, yet worse, for I had heard a quiver of emotion, the genuine article I sensed, not just an actor's rendition, in my brother's voice when he described me as a skinny girl crying with wretchedness. Surely he realized I did not actually live in poverty. He knew I had money. But just as surely Mrs. Hudson had told him how miserably I had been weeping when she let me in. Confound everything. Intent only on getting my cipher book back, I hadn't realized how such news might affect him. How could I safely reassure Brother Sherlock of my well-being? Such were my troubled musings as I entered the establishment of Dr. Leslie T. Ragaston, scientific Purgatorian. "Good morning, milady," cried the eager boy in buttons as he took my ulster. "Jotty," I told him with some asperity, "have you ever considered that other employers might change your rather ridiculous name to James or Cecil or Algernon just to suit themselves?" No, milady. No, Miss Michelle." "Just so, Jotty. Miss Michelle is how I prefer to be addressed. Now please be good enough to bring me the morning newspapers and some tea." But I scanned the papers without pleasure, for there was still no word from Mum. Well, surely in a day or two. But so badly I wanted her to advise me about Sherlock. Without benefit of her greater wisdom, how might I take action? Send my brother a letter of reassurance? But he was so confoundedly clever, what if he somehow traced it back to me? Place a similar message for him in the newspaper personal columns? But to do so even in cipher would be to make our family difficulties public. I could not risk damaging Sherlock's pride even worse than I had already. Moreover, surely Brother Mycroft, who so far, cold kidney pie that he was, had not much troubled me or my thoughts. Surely Mycroft would see such a message as well, and what sort of hornet's nest might ensue I could not imagine. I had no idea what to do. Sitting behind my desk in a shadowed frame of mind, looking over Dr. Ragaston's meagre correspondence, I found myself doodling on the backs of papers I had set aside to discard, producing a caricature of my brother with his cloth cap and his forelock hanging down. Unaccountably, I felt slightly better. Always when irritated or uneasy, I felt driven to draw, so, supplying myself with a sheaf of foolscap paper, I began to sketch in earnest. Sherlock again, then Mycroft, then Mum, then others. Faces mostly. The ragged little girl who had swept a crossing for me, the Dosses on the workhouse steps, Lady Theodora in her black jewelry. My mind had gone off in directions of its own. I drew the face of Alexander Finch. And to my own surprise, I gave it quite a nasty sneer. Whatever in the world? Sitting back, I closed my eyes and tried to recapture my visit to Ebenezer Finch and Son Emporium. Memory spoke in my mind. sort of colors one would expect from a screaming anarchist. She'd been reading Das Kapital, and we discussed the exploitation of the masses. She wanted me to show her the proletariat. What I think is, she walked right out the front door and put that ladder there herself. Had Alexander Finch's father merely been releasing Kohler? Whoa. Releasing Kohler. I don't know what that is. I know what cholera is, but there's no A. Or had he been calling his son an anarchist? I knew anarchists were blamed for dynamiting Victoria Station, attacking the offices of the Times, and most recently attempting to blow up the Tower of London, but other than what I saw in the newspapers, I knew nothing of these foreign assassins, these secret societies. Were anarchists something of the Marxist sort? Yet Alexander Finch had led me to believe that Lady Cecily was a Marxist. But if so, why had she mentioned nothing of such beliefs in her private journals? He had asserted that she had put the ladder under the window herself, but having experienced the pleasure of her dainty acquaintance, he must have known that that was simply not possible. Lady Cecily had met Alexander Finch. Lady Cecily had corresponded with Alexander Finch. Lady Cecily had explored London with Alexander Finch, and Lady Cecily had gone missing. Surely not entirely a coincidental series of events. Yet the police had failed to find her through him, and they watched him constantly. Or so he said. How foolish of me to accept his assurance in Lady Theodora's that he was kept under constant scrutiny. How much did I really know about Alexander Finch? Very little. I arose from my desk to go talk with him again. However, this time it was not Ivy Michelle who sallied forth to the department store. Instead it was Mrs. Ragiston. Or not Mrs. Ragiston, exactly, for today I wore a rich satin and velveteen day dress, not at all dowdy, as I would expect no timidity of manner. Or exhibit no timidity of manner. Excuse me. Alexander Finch had my-ladied me very well. Alexander Finch had my-ladied me. Very well, I'd be a lady, or at least gentry. I'd see how he liked that. I paid my 6 pence a mile in order to arrive at Finch and Son in a cab. A handsome cab, despite the cold, because I wanted a good view of the building's exterior. Warmly wrapped in my long fur cloak, I did not immediately exit the cab as it drew to a halt in front of the Finch establishment. I took my time looking, not at that glittering mercantile palace of brass, gas, and glass, the Emporium itself, but instead peering skyward, studying the building's upper stories where the clerks lodged, dormers, gables, drain-pipes, closely approximating the dormers and gables and drain-pipes of the building on either side. Meanwhile, a uniformed constable looking quite dull stood across the street, no doubt stationed there to watch the front door in case Alexander Finch came out. Exiting the cab and dismissing it, I sallied into the department store with my silk-gloved hands in my fur muff, my hat towering with ostrich feathers, and my skirt regally trailing. I should like to speak with Mr. Alexander Finch, I demanded condescendingly of the first clerk I encountered. A slight, freckled, rickety sort of young man, he visibly fumbled for words before squeaking out a reply. Alexander Finch, I'm not sure he is in just now, my lady. I arched my brows in feigned ire and genuine astonishment. This hapless clerk was more afraid of young Finch than he was of me? I remembered how the willowy girl at the shoe counter had fled at young Finch's command. At that misfortunate moment it occurred to me to wonder, why had that peculiar youth chosen to converse with me in the shoe department while walking past, for instance, gloves? Because he liked boots, I supposed, especially the lace-up sort. He enjoyed pulling the lacings tight. Why, he had quite strangled... I felt the strangest chill run through me as my personage comprehended the moment in advance of my mind. Indeed, I suddenly felt so weak that I swayed on my feet. My lady? The clerk's anxious voice seemed to reach me from a great distance. As those other voices had sounded so far away, that night I regained consciousness with the garrote still around my neck. I remembered terror, blur, fog, the nondescript man lifting my veil. I remembered where I had seen Alexander Finch's face before. The freckled clerk cried, "Help! Somebody! She's going to faint!" An excellent idea, as my intentions had taken quite a sudden about-face. I now fervidly wished to avoid speaking with Alexander Finch. He must not see me, and while I had never feigned to faint before, it seemed simple enough. Rolling my eyes upwards as I closed them, I began to collapse towards the floor. "Catch her, then!" Another male voice, rather cockney, spoke close to my ear as the fellow grasped me under the elbow. The rickety clerk, I think, took my other arm, and I allowed myself to sag in the hands of my supporters as they hustled me through a door somewhere off to the side of the store. "Lay her on the bench," said another voice, a woman's this time. "Who is she?" "Dunno. She wanted to see Mr. Alexander." "Coo, somebody ought to warn her." I felt my personage being placed as directed, gently enough, considering how unyielding a wooden bench is. Someone began to unbutton my high collar. Easing my eyes open just enough to peep through my eyelashes, I saw my good Samaritan was a female servant of middle age. The high-backed bench faced the hearth, hiding the rest of the room from my view, but I surmised, if only from that rude item of furniture, that they had taken me to the clerk's tea and luncheon room. What did she want to see him for? Asked a man's voice. I don't know, right wrought up she was. Do you think with the swag she's wearing on her, she might be a shipyard's boss's wife, like? Or a factory owner's? Trying to talk some sense into him about all the trouble he's stirring up? I always say them factory ends are a rough lot, especially them match girls. Unbuttoning my cuffs to chafe my wrists, the servant evidently considered herself to be on equal standing with the clerks, for she spoke her mind. To them in a so-called strike, too mule-head to touch chemicals and only working 14 hours a day now. It's not the match girls he's fomenting any more, it's the dockmen, and what do they want with all the free time is beyond me, doing whatever they like, and the carters and such, spoiling their reputations, luring good girls out of the domestic service, and this poor lady's fainting away for wanting proper care. Where's the smelling salts, for the love of mercy? Oh, right here. With my eyes once more firmly lidded, I laid still as the pungent restorative was pressed to my nose, disciplining myself not to respond, for I wanted to hear more. While my person and face appeared, I hoped, insensible, my mind hopped, shrieked, and grabbed like a child presented with sugar plums. Foment, Alexander Finch, dock workers, match girls, strike. Hadn't Jotty mumbled something like that about a match and a strike? One of the male voices was saying, the cottage is mostly being sensible, what I hear, but the dockyards is all pot and boil to strike a blow for workers' rights, what they call it. She ain't coming around. My nurse sounded worried. Get me a scissors so I can cut a stay lacings. Oh no, she must not be permitted to see my corset. I bestirred my eyelids slightly. Wait a minute, said the kindly woman. At the same time, an unmistakable voice roared from somewhere close at hand. What's going on in here? Get back to your stations. Yes, Mr. Finch. Yes, sir. The lady fainted, you see. Lady? Bellowed the elder Finch. What lady? I interjected a moan in order to deflect his attention from his clerks onto me. Well, send for a doctor, he barked. You men get back to work. You've got no business loitering about when a lady's lying down. The door slammed behind their various voices. I opened my eyes, smiled weakly at the servant, and told her I was feeling better, thank you so much, but my overfed candy-grabbing mind snatched at loitering. Alexander Finch had just been a bystander, perhaps, who had chanced to be loitering about on the night I was unconscious lying in the street, which was only a few days after Lady Cecily had disappeared, when the police were supposed to be keeping a close eye on him. Each thought made me feel queasier, more faint and ill, but I forced myself to smile, stand up, and take my leave, for matters of the utmost urgency required my attention. That's the end of the 13th chapter. Oh, hello, Salad! Hello! Oh, Tara and Summer, I don't know if you guys are here, but thank you for hosting. I appreciate that. Animal crackers are fantastic. What? She remembers terror. What? Oh, in the book. Right. Thank you. Thank you for the claps. How's everyone? I'm doing good. Had a good day today. I worked till I left work early to go down to the Apple store, and then I was driving down the road and I saw this weird guy walking down the street. So I waved at him, and he waved back. So that happened. And then I just ate dinner, and now I decided to stream because my parents are watching a football game at a restaurant. And my brother is playing Roller Coaster Tycoon 2. So, yeah, it was. It was Terror. That's exactly who it was. So, he's just walking down the street going to the grocery store. I was just driving in my car, so. Yes, I really like Roller Coaster Tycoon. It's a good game. He should stream it. That would be great. Hey, Graham!
What's up?
You should stream Roller Coaster Tycoon. Well, I mean, I'm streaming, so it would compete with me, but sometime.
I definitely want to soon.
He says he wants to soon, so. Virtual Villagers? I've never heard of that game. You saw it go down? Tara does see everything. He knows all. Knows everything. Alrighty. So. We're gonna press on. Been going, sorry, my shirt's sliding up. Okay, So I'm going to press, if that's okay with you guys. I hope you guys are enjoying the book. Please feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I will talk between chapters, but just enjoy listening. And we'll move on. Chapter the 14th. Before the shadowy smoke-clouded day could darken to even more... Chapter the 14th. Before the shadowy smoke-clouded day could darken to even more shadowy night, I returned to the vicinity of Ebenezer Finch and Son. I will spare the gentle reader a full account of the risks of detection I had run in the interval. Briefly put, after changing back into Miss Michelle at Dr. Ragiston's office, I had then at my lodging eluded Mrs. Tupper to exit as a nun, wearing my heavily veiled habit for the sake of its total concealment of my features, even though it made me an object of curiosity. I felt the glances of passersby as I walked out of St. Pancras Station. These Londoners had... Sorry, our Amazon Echo just started talking from another room. So, excuse me. Sorry, that freaked me out. I felt the glances of passersby as I walked out of St. Pancras Station. These Londoners had not seen me before. In this reasonably prosperous area there was small need for the sister of the street's ministrations. Not that I had ventured here for the sake of charity. I came empty-handed, so to speak, as my gloved fingertips beneath my mantle, folded almost as if in prayer, rested upon the concealed hilt of my dagger. I ventured nowhere near the resplendent front of Ebenezer Finch and Son Emporium, instead approaching that seductive establishment from the rear, through a maze of mews where cart horses and milk cows were kept. I stopped in the shadow of a pigeon-cote to survey the terrain. Once again I studied the Finch building's windows, roofline, and rain-spouting with an interest which architecture had never before inspired me. This was the first time I had had occasion to regard a building as structure to be climbed. As if surveying a winter tree for the best way up and or down, with my gaze I traced different routes until I decided how I would do it. Predicting then where in the rapidly darkening back passageways Alexander Finch would descend, I retreated once more into the concealing mews, made a circuit, then found myself a sheltering doorway in which to wait. Before it was quite dark as I had expected, for he needed to be able to see his way down somewhat, and he could not give himself away by carrying a light. Just at nightfall, here he came like a sort of monstrous caterpillar along the rooftops, creeping along the shingles or tiles on his knees and elbows, keeping his head down and staying out of sight of any constable who might be standing watch in the street or at the store's back door. From time to time I lost sight of him behind chimney stacks, but always in a brief while he reappeared. With a nimble ease that showed how often he had done this before, he swung himself across the gaps between buildings. Having reached the end of the row, he descended to the eaves, swiveled around, and then let himself down by the water pipe onto the wooden top of a covered water barrel, and so to the gravel of the corner chandler's delivery drive. I could just make out the pale mask of his face, eyeglasses and all, as he glanced around. Rather than the dandified garments in which I had seen him previously, he wore the rough, dark flannel and corduroy of a day laborer and a cloth cap. As soon as he had made sure there was no one nearby, or so he thought, he strode off towards the street. I let him get well ahead of me before I slipped from the shadows and followed. This, northwest London, was a quarter not nearly so poor as the East End. No ladies of the night or water spigots stood at the corners. Folk here had their own vices and their own plumbing, but neither was it fashionable nor rich. Nondescript, like Alexander Finch's face, with streets neither crowded nor deserted, it was an area I knew only a little. I could count on the fingers of one hand the times I had been to this part of the city to visit Dr. Watson, to burgle my brother Sherlock's lodgings, and to twice shop at Ebenezer Finch and Son's Emporium. 4 times not counting the venture of the moment. It is no wonder I rather lost my way as I followed Alexander Finch. And on several occasions I very nearly lost him. It was fortuitously a night rather less thick than usual, but even so darkness abounded. I had seen the electric lighting along the Thames embankment, utterly amazing, nearly turning night into day. By comparison, the wavering flames of gas street lamps only interrupted the night, did not vanquish it. Only interrupted the night, did not vanquish it. Most of the time, Alexander Finch, like other folk on the street, remained a shadow amongst shadows. I could see him clearly only when he passed directly under a street lamp. So that he should not see me in likewise, I walked in the middle of the street, a venture I hope never to repeat. In daytime it would have been dangerous. At night, and all clad in black, it was doubly so. Even with their coal oil lamps lit, the carriage drivers could not see me to avoid running me over, had I not dodged them. No simple matter, as the footing consisted of nameless icy slop and horse muck. More than once I nearly fell, and one time I did indeed lose my footing, and had to roll across the cobblestones to keep myself from being trampled under the horse's iron-shod hooves. I struggled up, skirt and mantle wet and dragging, just in time to get out of the way of a great clopping Clydesdale pulling a lumber wagon. Indeed, there were many carts and wagons now. Alexander Finch had led me to a sort of warehouse area, adjacent, as nearly as I could reckon, to the great produce market Covent Garden. Where on earth? But even as I wondered, he halted at at a decrepit doorway, over which an ill-lettered placard advertised beds, 6 pence a night, women's ward 8 pence, tea, bread, washing water, extra. In other words, the poorest sort of doss house, or common lodging-house, with flea and lice-infested cots sat in rows, the sort of place where the pitiful hairless crawler on the workhouse steps had lost her few remaining possessions to a thief, the sort of place that had likely given her the ringworm in exchange. I guessed, yet could not believe what I was thinking, whom young Finch expected to find within. But rather than knock at the door, he stepped around the corner of the slovenly building, out of sight. Biting my lip, I stood like a black, muck-coated statue on the far side of the street, for I admit I simply did not know what to do. If I followed him into the narrow space between buildings, surely he would notice me, yet if I did not follow him, I had to. Muttering something naughty, I strode across the street, but as I neared the doss house, to my surprise, a strange man stepped out of the shadow where Alexander Finch should have been. A man with long black hair and a spade-shaped, full black beard. The only skin around his eyes showed, starkly pallid beneath the beard, for he wore no eyeglasses, and his eyes, even though they did not look at me, I felt their force. Even in the night I saw how curiously bright and almost silver they were. Beneath my veil, my jaw dropped, my mouth gaped, and only with the most arduous mental discipline did I keep from gasping out loud. The man was Alexander Finch, in disguise, but I would not have known him if it had not been for the cloth cap, flannel shirt, corduroy jacket, and trousers he wore. Intent on his business, he had taken no particular note of me amongst the others passing by. As he turned his back to knock on the door of the doss house, I slipped into the hiding place he had just quitted. He knocked hard, impatiently, upon the door until it opened. Then, in honey and vinegar tones, Finch inquired, "Would my lady care to take the air?" She did not answer, only slipped out of that dark doorway like a frightened animal. Indeed, I would not have kept a dog in such a hole. "Give me the lantern." She carried a lantern? Apparently. I saw movement, then Alexander Finch struck a match. And at my first plain sight of Lady Cecily, I struggled anew to keep from crying out. I would not have known her had he not led me to her. Indeed, I think her own mother might not have recognized her gaunt, pale face, her hair all dirty tangle beneath the cloth tied around her head, her shivering shoulders warmed only by her shawl, her skirt threadbare and tattered, her feet wrapped in rags. Only because my pencil had traced so many times those delicate features could I believe my eyes. Lady Cecily, a beggar girl carrying a large basket. He lit the lantern and handed it back to her. She said something, although she spoke so timidly I could not hear her words. "Work first," he answered aloud. "Food afterward." Again she murmured, her eyes huge and pleading. But this time, instead of answering, he puffed his lips in exasperation, then peered at her and darted his fingertips toward her face as if he were shaking some sort of fluid out of himself and onto her. His own face had gone very still, his curiously light-colored eyes fierce, focused, gleaming. His hands traced several sinuous passes around her head, then down over her shoulders. I would not have believed it had I not seen, but I saw. Without ever touching her, he took her utterly into his power. All hope and yearning, all her feeble life force faded from her eyes so that she stood like a most unlikely porcelain doll, starveling and ragged in a sooty glass bell. "Work first," her master repeated. "Food afterward." Without another glance at her, the wild-haired, black-bearded scoundrel walked off in the direction of Paddington Station, and she limped after him, carrying both lantern and basket, like a ragtag tied to his elbow. He was no taller than most youths, but her head, bowed, barely reached the level of his shoulder. Staying well behind him, but allowing myself the luxury of the pavement this time, I followed my mind in a hullabaloo of horror, curiosity, and speculation, for I could not yet quite take in what I had seen. And all the while my entire person, indeed my very skin, tingled with urgency to do something, assist her in some way, intervene. But how, and against what exactly? I could not yet make sense of the circumstances, I could only watch. At a corner opposite a public house, some roughened-looking men clotted beneath a street lamp. I saw Alexander Finch with Lady Cecily trailing behind him like a child, stop to greet them. After handshakes all around, they set up a wooden crate of some sort, and Alexander, or the black-bearded impostor I could scarcely believe to be Alexander, got upon the improvised dais and started to speak. Keeping to the shadows, I stood far off to hear properly, but I caught references to capitalist oppression, empire built upon the backs of exploited labor, workers' rights, and so forth. Undoubtedly, I was observing the Finch I was observing Finch, the outside influence of which the newspaper columnist spoke, in the very act of fermenting unrest in the working class, specifically the carters and dock workers, as the clerks at the Finch Emporium had said. That they knew of the young master's nighttime activities surprised me not at all. Servants and the like always know everything, although they will tell nothing except to one another. Ascending his speaking platform, Alexander had given Lady Cecily her orders, and now she stood at a small distance from him, beneath another gas lamp mounted upon the wall of the corner building, rather woodenly reaching into her basket and offering each person who stopped to listen something small and white. My word, Jotty had said he'd seen her with papers, pamphlets, for a labor union or some such rabble-rousing endeavor. Already, a considerable crowd of men and very few women had gathered to listen to Alexander Finch's harangue. I would perhaps be not unduly noticed if I approached just another bypasser who happened to be a nun on the street. After considering for a moment, I decided to take the risk. Trying to show neither haste nor hesitation, I walked towards Lady Cecily. "The opiate of the masses," the bearded Finch was declaiming from his, yes, I think it actually was a soapbox. "As all too plainly demonstrated in every good English aristocrat's favourite childhood hymn, all creatures great and small, the Lord God made them all, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. The good Lord God is said to have decreed that 3/4 of the populace shall live in labour and bone-skewing, mud-stunting poverty, while a few favoured shall occupy their days by having their servants assist them in 5 changes of clothing." One could not help but admire the fervour and clarity with which he spoke. He was brilliant. I agreed with much of what he was saying. It was hard to believe the foul deeds of which I suspected him. Yet one could speak truth and still be a villain, and there stood Lady Cecily. A few heads turned as I reached the edge of the crowd, but most who stood upon that corner wanted only to listen, whether in shock or in admiration. As for Finch himself, intent as he was on his oration, I hoped he did not notice the black-mantled veiled Sister of Charity, or even if he did, I imagined he could not at this moment devote much thought to our previous meeting under what had been for me most unpleasant circumstances. As for the girl with the basket, she stood as dull as the soot falling around us, and as silent. Only when I passed directly in front of her, half-heartedly she poked a pamphlet at me. It was necessary that the mute sister of the streets must speak tonight, if never again. "Lady Cecily," I whispered to that personage as I accepted her tract. She did not look at me. "Lady Cecily," I spoke softly, yet close to her ear. I am sure she must have heard. Yet she did not respond at all, not with a blink, a breath, a glance, not even with a startled twitch. "Twice we have assembled peaceably, as is our right," the street-corner platform speaker passionately declaimed. "Twice we have marched to Trafalgar Square under the silken flags of our guilds to adjure the West End of London to remember us, and the police have beaten us back with billy clubs, and after we withdrew bloodied and defeated, this is what one member of Parliament had to say. It is in bad taste for the people to parade their insolent starvation in the face of the rich and trading portions of the town. They should have starved in their garrets." The crowd now overflowed into the street, as far as the opposite pavement, yet amongst all those bystanders, Sorry, I thought I grabbed an extra page. Yet among all those bystanders, one heard not a sound except the voice of the black-haired orator. Alexander Finch's vehement silver glance passed like magnetism over and through the crowd, as to the man, and to a man the listeners stood entranced. They gazed as if they were, finally I allowed myself to think it, mesmerized, like Lady Cecily. That's the end of chapter 14. Oh, Summer, hello! Welcome. Yes, Tara is the Steve. Welcome for joining, Summer. Glad to have you. We've missed you. Although I should speak for myself. I've missed you. I hope you are having a good summer. I hope you're enjoying your time working and playing and having fun. Hope you're doing well. Thank you for the claps, everybody. Yeah, so it's been good. Everything's been doing good over here. We're just, missing our wonderful ukulele spirit in our midst. Oh, thank you, Tori. I like this shirt too. I got this in Belfast, obviously. So I think it's pretty cool. I'll show it to you. Belfast, Ireland. Northern Ireland. Not to be confused with the rest of Ireland, which is just called Ireland. But we didn't go there. We didn't go to Dublin. We just went to Belfast, so. Maybe next time I'll get to go to Dublin. Belfast is the second largest city in Ireland, though, so it's pretty cool. Oh, awesome! Last night, back in Georgia. So, is the weather any nicer in Georgia by comparison? Hello! Oh my gosh! Look who it is! You didn't go to Northern Ireland, Brady? How are you doing? Your name's not Kate anymore. It makes me sad. But I could still call you Kate, right? Does that work? But how are you, Susan? I feel like I haven't talked to you in forever, but welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming in and listening to me read a book that has been a long time finishing. It's you, Susan. That's what you're looking at. Just look in the mirror, and you'll see the most wonderful person. Australian Kinsey. I think Australian Kinsey is a pretty good username, though. You know, it has Australia in the name, so can't really beat that. Alrighty, well, please, everybody, feel free, catch up, grab a snack, get some food, whatever you want to do. I'm gonna keep going. We got 3 more chapters left of this book, and we're just gonna keep on going. Oh yeah, it's winter time where you are, right, Susan? Because you're in the southern hemisphere. It's like Christmas weather, but, you know, for us. I hope you're staying warm and enjoying the weather as best you can. Does it snow where you live, Susan? I mean, I know it snows in some parts of Australia, but I hope that you're staying warm, drinking lots of hot cocoa and eating lots of soup and getting cozy. I always like bundling up on the couch with like something hot to drink, either like soup or hot cocoa, and watch a really good movie. Probably my favorite like rainy day or like shut in, like closed up, you know, in the house day movies is probably Anne of Green Gables, the original like TV series that came on PBS that they sold as like a double VHS tape, and I bought the DVDs. So that's what I'd recommend if you're looking for a cold, you know, don't go outside and stay inside in a blanket and eat soup day. That's what I would recommend. So there you go. Now you have an idea for the weekend. Alrighty. Chapter the 15th. Mesmerism. The stuff of music hall entertainments and parlor amusements. I would not have believed it had I not seen it. But I had seen him do it to Lady Cecily. However briefly I had seen him make the magnetic pass with his hands and penetrate her with his gaze, as Mrs. Bailey amongst others had described to me. And now Lady Cecily stood before me on a street corner, listless, in rags, an automaton, forgetting her hunger just in order to hand out anarchist pamphlets. Just looking at her I wanted to scream with frustration. Desperately I desired to help her, free her, rescue her, do something. But what? Go fetch a police constable? But he would have no knowledge of the disappearance of Lady Cecily, and therefore no reason to detain her. Race to tell Lady Theodora all that I knew, then let her deploy the authorities? But that would take hours, perhaps even a day, and in the meantime, what if something happened to Lady Cecily? Let them set their imperialist police on us, cried her captor on the street corner crowd. Let them give us another bloody Sunday, for the next time we will color our flags with the hue of our beaten heads. Next time we will fly red flags of revolution. And the men tossed their ragged caps in the air, wildly shouting, cheering for their newfound messiah. But I knew that beneath the wild black wig and false beard he was no working-class hero. He was a sham, a rich shopkeeper's son, and he was glorying in the power with which he swayed the crowd. He liked to wield power, apparently. Watching the subjugated girl, Lady Cecily, I knew I could not turn my back on her for even a moment lest she disappear again. I must get her away from here. From him. Here. Now. But how? Unmesmerize her? This was done, I had heard, by performing the magnetic maneuvers in reverse. It seemed most unlikely I could actually accomplish it. Seize her and carry her off bodily? But then I would be pursued as a kidnapper, for she would cry out and struggle against me. I knew she would, for while she looked as meek as a dove, standing there with downcast eyes, handing out pamphlets, tame as she seemed, I knew full well there was another side to her. Not the Lady Cecily who drew smudgy pastels, but the left-handed lady who drew bold, dark... Wait a minute. Lady Cecily, or the wan pauper girl whom I knew to be Lady Cecily, was giving out papers. With her right hand. And as this realization flashed upon me, such an electric illumination of simultaneous conjecture, hypothesis, and hope burst into my benighted mind that I am sure my eyes went as round as a bull's-eye's lanterns. All these words, you guys. Safely hidden by my black veil, my mouth gaped. I whispered, "Oh, my stars and garters! Oh, if only I could do it, make contact with the left-handed lady, acting on the premise that only the proper and docile right-handed Lady Cecily had fallen under the power of the villain. If the secret rebellious left-handed lady lurked unfettered within this meek creature before me, I had to communicate with her, and quickly, and in a way that would cause her to connect with me as if by telegraph wires almost instantly. More by instinct than by conscious thought I knew how it might be done. Her charcoal drawings, you see, had strangely affected me, touched some deep recognition in me, almost as if she and I could be soulmates. Perhaps, just perhaps, she might similarly recognize me. So, reaching into a pocket for pencil and paper, I always carried some with me, I opened the political pamphlet, hid the paper behind it, and standing with the gaslight to my back so that only the gaunt, listless girl in rags could see me, I drew. Instinct, again, more than conscious thought, told me what to draw, how to best depict freedom as Lady Cecily had experienced it. Doing so, I sketched as rapidly and well as ever I had done in my life. I drew a likeness of Lady Cecily dressed in stylish modern Turkish bloomers, pedaling a bicycle, skimming the earth by her own power, as I too loved to do. Lady Cecily, strong and beautiful, smiling with the wind ruffling her hair and blowing her hat ribbons in the air. And as my pencil flew out of the tail of my eye, I could see the right-handed pauper girl grow motionless, forgetting her assigned task of handing out political tripe. I saw her stiffen, her gaze riveted upon the drawing. I switched the pencil to my left hand. Very clumsily I began to scrawl beneath the drawing from right to left in mirror writing. But I had gone a bit too far. She dropped her basket, and before I could complete the question, her left hand shot out, snatching the pencil and paper away from me. Dull as soot, no longer she stood before me like a small and icy flame, demanding, "How dare you? What do you think you're doing? Who are you?" Luckily, no one around us paid any attention, for the crowd roared in agreement with Alexander Finch as he harangued, "Let them set their saber-waving cavalry upon us! Let them massacre us as they did at Peterloo! Yet we will persevere!" Lady Cecily sounded as if she quite wanted a saber to wield upon me. "Who are you?" And on the spur of the moment, oh dear, how the cavalry metaphor does take hold. I mean, at that time of crisis, not knowing how else to calm her and answer her, I did something the sister should never have done. Had never done before. I lifted my veil. I let her see my face. My long, plain, Ciceronian face. She stared. She took a breath and let it go in a puff as if blowing out a candle. "Why," she said softly, "you're just a girl." She continued to study me as if both puzzled and intrigued. "You draw marvelously well," she added. I thought of the superb charcoal artwork she had never let anyone see, and something must have shown in my face, something that made her smile. "You're no nun," she said in a light tone as if teasing a girlfriend. "Whatever were you doing in that absurd habit?" In my most aristocratic accent, so that she would know we were alike in class as well as in other ways, I responded, "Lady Cecily, one might also ask." I meant to twit her about being a baronet's daughter and dressed in rags, but as I spoke her name she froze and let out a squeak, almost a scream, as if she had not known that I knew her, as if she had not heard me call her by a name before, as if she had been deaf then but could hear me now. Her reaction fortunately went unnoticed amidst the cheering of the crowd. "Lady Cecily," I tried again, "there is no need for alarm. I only wish to befriend you, to take you somewhere warm and safe, give you supper, and get you out of those rags." She looked down at herself, then up at me again, with a wild, frightened stare, then all around her, bewildered and half-panicked as she scarcely knew where she was. "The company here is most unpleasant," I gently remarked. "Shall we go?" Taking her left hand, bare and blue, her poor hands chapped with cold, I drew her a few steps away from Alexander Finch and his mob of followers. "The working man has a right to unionize for a fair hourly pay," that street-corner orator bellowed, "and a fair working day." Lady Cecily stopped where she was. "No," she faltered. "No, I can't." "Why not?" My tone remained soft and even, for above all I must not excite her again, must not risk drawing Finch's attention to her and to me. My loyalty, the cause, the name of Cameron Shaw shall be written on the history of England. He will be a great man some day. Who? Cameron Shaw! With a glance of fervent devotion she indicated the black-haired, black-bearded rabble-rouser on his soapbox. Did you mean to say you've never heard of him? Soothingly, and also truthfully, I answered, I am most anxious to hear all about him. How did you meet him? It was most peculiar. With her brow creased, she stood again, bewildered, her eyes watering as she shivered in the cold like a lost child. Come, I told her, and again taking her by the hand, I led her away. At the first corner I veered into a different street, out of Alexander Finch's sight should he chance to turn his head. Then, breathing out, I slowed my pace so that Lady Cecily could get along more comfortably, stumbling on her half-frozen, rag-wrapped feet, but also so that I could attempt to decipher where we were and where we were going. Nothing looked familiar about any of the streets I scanned. I neither saw nor heard anyone else nearby. This neighborhood seemed to be mostly deserted on a winter night, although anybody from a pickpocket to Jack the Ripper himself could have lurked in the foggy, smoky shadows between the street lamps. Lady Cecily's teeth began to click like my rosary. Such was the chill of the night and her fright. Stopping for a moment, finding in my pocket some of the strength-replenishing candies I always carried with me, I gave them to her. As she fumbled to unwrap one and place it in her mouth, I took off my fur-lined gloves and put them onto her frigid hands. I opened my mantle and invited her to share its warmth, wrapping it around both of us, my left arm around her shoulder as if she were my little sister, and my right hand fingering the hilt of my dagger as we moved on again. So tell me, I asked her once more gently, how did you meet this, Cameron Shaw? I can barely speak of it. You'll think I'm mad. I promise you I will think nothing of the sort. How did it happen? In a dream, she replied. He came to me in my sleep, in my mind, like a black-haired angel summoning me to be a handmaiden of his crusade. Ah, I murmured in what I hoped was a comforting, encouraging way, although I had to exercise my strongest self-control to keep from shuddering at the image forming in my mind, the disguised villain standing over her bed as she slept, staring at her with his eerie eyes, passing his hands over her slumbering innocence to penetrate her with the vital principle of his animal magnetism, taking her into his power before she could completely awaken. I was chosen, said the trembling lady. Called, like Joan of Arc. Yes, I understand. You do understand, don't you? Good, I had managed to keep my furious feelings out of my voice. All in a relieved rush, Lady Cecily spoke on. Then I awoke in the middle of the night, and there was no one in my room, but the call was so strong that I got out of bed. I knew exactly what I must do. There were humble clothes laid out waiting for me, a skirt and blouse and shawl, such as a washerwoman might wear. I put them on over my nightgown. The window was open. I climbed out. I climbed down. The fearsome memory halted both her words and her feet. We stood at a benighted crossroads, and I recognized nothing in any direction, not even to tell east from west or north from south. Blindly choosing a side street, I set off again, herding her along with me before I spoke. Down the ladder. How did you know? But without waiting for an answer, she went on. Yes, the ladder. And it was so high, and it trembled. I was terrified, but I had to do it. Cameron Shaw, you know, he was waiting for me at the bottom. Had you never met him before? No, never, except in the dream. That is what makes it all so very uncanny, you see. So she did not recognize Alexander Finch under that false hair and fake beard. Alexander Finch, shopkeeper's son. I remembered how I had first seen him as nothing more than a nondescript youth, dressed like a gent, but aside from dandified clothing, a nothing. How woodenly he had stood, seemingly without spirit, as the elder Finch had ranted at him. But now I began to understand. All that rage had not been wasted upon him. He had taken it in, a lifetime's worth, and it had made him a person whom I should be very loath to trust. Lady Cecily stiffened under my arm, my mantle. As suddenly as if she were a puppet and someone had pulled on her strings, she halted, saying in a strange tone, I ought to get back. Back where? Home? I have no home. Certainly you have a home, a baronet's mansion. With Daddy always and forever droning about a burden of empire and the progress of man, meanwhile intending to marry me off to anything titled and wearing trousers? No, I cannot go back there. I tightened my arm around Lady Cecily's shoulders, touched by her honesty and by her conversation. One must realize that I had gone for the better part of a year lacking any intimate conversation with another human being, and this girl, so much like me, after all, just talking with her, I experienced great warmth of feeling for her. There are other possibilities, I said. Such as the life you have chosen, perhaps? How did you do it? Who are you? You have not yet told me your name. And oh, I wanted to. I yearned to tell her all about myself, my most lonely, peculiar, eccentric self. Maybe Maybe it would not, after all, be necessary to return her to her life of smudged pastels and the polite right-handed taking of tea. Maybe she could instead live, like a sister, with me. That's the end of chapter 15. Oh, bye, Summer. Have a good night. I hope I didn't miss you. Tori doesn't stream, she just employs people to stream for her. And she feeds them in snacks and beverages and coffee. Oh, thanks for carrying me around the house. Hope that's been fun. Wow! Yep. I only stream like once a month, so it's taken me like 6 months to get through this 2 books, so that's pretty accurate. Alrighty. So is this the last chapter? We got one more after this. Alrighty. She had the Stockholm Syndrome. It wasn't really Stockholm Syndrome. She was hypnotized. Or mesmerized, if you're wanting to call it what the book calls it. No, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. I work very well for food. You can always pay me in food. And I will... Like, people ask me to do things for them, and they're like, I'll buy you dinner afterwards. And I'm like, heck yeah. And they're like, I can only afford McDonald's. And I'm like, don't care. It's food that I don't have to pay for. Or cook. So, actually, I'm just kidding. I've never had anybody offer to pay me in dinner, and dinner end up being McDonald's. Aw, thanks, Tori, but you knew what I meant. You knew what I meant. Alrighty. I'm gonna go ahead and press. Sorry, that swallow wasn't wanting to go down. You're gonna watch me choke on stream. Just kidding. Alrighty. Chapter the 16th. I felt my lips trembling as they parted. I felt my breathing hasten. I heard myself say, Enola. My name is Enola Holmes. And I would have told her more. I would have told her all about myself if it were not that, just at that moment, a voice intervened from the darkness. Cecily! Come here! The voice of her master, not far away. Lost in circling, I had failed to get her well away from him, and I am sure you will think that I overspeak, gentle reader, when I say that I felt the presence of his rage like a force of nature in the night, but I tell you the merest truth. His fury vibrated in the sooty shadows, palpable. I felt Lady Cecily startle like a frightened fawn, and cringe, and begin to shake. I must get back, she whispered in terror. No! Holding on to her as I wildly scanned the neighborhood for some escape or refuge, at last I recognized a nearby street. I had visited there. I knew where I was and which way to flee, but she broke away from me. Lady Cecily, no! She never so much as turned her head in farewell. Indeed, she seemed not to hear me, nor did she run from me. Like a somnambulist. Holy crap. This is like your SAT. Yeah, this is like an SAT book. Somnambulist. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I can understand what it means, but, like, how you pronounce it, I'm just not good at that, okay? She walked away from me, or rather, towards him. I could see him now, a blacker form in the darkness at the bottom of the street. I like to put the text down there, so that, or, technically it's right there. Yeah, right there. I like to put the text up so that you can see that, like, it is kind of a difficult word to pronounce if you're, like, reading quickly. So, well, thanks, Riddy. I could see him now, a blacker form in the darkness at the bottom of the street. While I stood rigid in the shadows, she shuffled towards him like a blind person in grimed rags that once might have been white. Cecily! He saw her in the street lamplight. Although I had heard no gladness in that recognition, I heard fearsome peril. How dare you leave your work? Come here! It appeared that he had not heard nor seen me. Yet. I pulled my veil down to conceal my face. He stalked towards Lady Cecily, and she walked to meet him. In the middle of the shadowed, deserted street she faced him, head bowed as if she were a naughty child. I heard him speak to her in tones that mocked yet menaced. I did not catch the words, for my attention was fully occupied with any sounds I might make, slipping towards them. I saw him lower his bearded head to breathe into Lady Cecily's face. I saw her cringe. Taking a twisted way through the deepest shadows, I crept nearer to him, quite near, without being seen. Listen to me. You listen, worthless chit, he was saying as I tiptoed towards him from one side, and his anger would have been fearsome enough in and of itself, but there was more. It was the mesmerist commanding her, the magnetizer holding her helpless with his cobra stare. You shall obey me, or you will be punished. For your disobedience tonight, you forfeit your supper. What have I just told you? Speak. Like an echo of him, or a ghost of herself, she started to whisper, for my disobedience. At that moment I charged. With a yell worthy of a street urchin, I darted both hands to the mesmerist's face and gripped his hair. Savage, screeching, tugging as hard as I could, with one hand I snatched off the wig, with the other I pulled off his false beard. Lady Cecily shrieked. Had she been corseted, I believe she might have fainted, but with a great gasp she rallied, crying, Alexander Finch! There he stood, in his own head naked even of his tinted eyeglasses, seeming unable to think what to do or say. Alexander Finch! Lady Cecily shouted, outraged. It was as I had thought. She would bear ill usage from one whom she admired, but she could not abide being deceived. Impostor! Fraud! All had reversed in that moment as I stood aside, flinging the disgusting hairy objects in my hands down on the street. How dare you play me for a fool? Silence, he told her with an attempt at his former authority. Silence, you vile beetle! No, you maggot! He did indeed rather resemble a maggot, with his round pale head, his pallid eyes. You worm! You may well wish for silence, but I will not rest until every police court in England has heard of your infamy. With a glare fit to cut him open like a razor, she turned to walk away. But this man knew no shame. He grabbed for her. Don't you turn your back on me. I am talking to you. She eluded his grasp and marched off, not running away. On frozen feet wrapped in rags, she walked at an aristocratic pace. Perhaps hers had been a dual personality once, but not any more. No one could have mistaken her for a pauper in that moment. She sailed like a ship on the Thames, every inch a lady. Wench, don't you dare defy me! She made no reply but to keep walking. Language warning. Proud bitch, I'm warning you. And although Alexander Finch's voice did not rise, something in his tone turned me colder than the night ever could, and raised the small hairs on the back of my neck. Dual personality. No, it was not Lady Cecily who had gone the way of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I saw her hasten her pace slightly as she kept walking. No chit of a girl turns her back on me, shouted Finch as he whipped something out of his pocket. Something long loop of white. Something seeming to writhe like a white snake in the night. It is one thing to suspect or even know in one's heart, but quite another thing to actually see. The sight stunned me out of my wits for a moment so that I could only cry out, No! And leap at him to stop him. Most ineffectually. He quite simply clouted me with the back of his fist, sending me flying to one side, after which he paid me no further heed. Perhaps he remembered my panicked flight after our other nighttime encounter, and expected the same. Perhaps he thought no female could do anything more than scream, faint, or run away. Perhaps in his murderous rage he did not think at all. His blow felled me to the cobblestones, where I lay with all the breath knocked out of me, paralyzed for a moment, unable to move. But I could see. I saw that maddened villain spring like a beast of prey after Lady Cecily. Pouncing upon her from behind, he threw the garrote over her head and drew it tight. Lady Cecily's face contorted, her eyes rolled skyward, her hands flew to her neck, clawing at the vicious unseen thing, constricting to cut short her life, just as my hands had done that dreadful night when, and in that stunned instant, gasping for breath and remembering, I learned what it meant to see red. The night turned that hue before my eyes as wrath galvanized me so that I leapt to my feet. My dagger seemed to spring to my hand so fiercely I had drawn it. Weapon raised, I hurtled towards the garroter. Cruel. He has no reason to enslave her except that he likes to play with power. He had no other reason to attack me either. Just strangled me senseless, nearly to death, before, although perhaps only because of chance interruption, he had stopped to amuse himself by having a look at my face. Maggot, I cried. You sewer rat. You repulsive, creeping... Confound my genteel upbringing, that I could not think of any name foul enough to call that evil wretch as I plunged my knife into him. into the swollen muscle of his upper arm, not his heart. Even such a monster I did not care to kill. With a hoarse cry he let go of his vile murder toy. Lady Cecily dropped to the cobblestones. I think Alexander turned to face me, hands lifted to fend off my blows, but indeed I scarcely know. I remember only that I stabbed him again in the arm or shoulder, stabbed and stabbed again until in a half-blind, blood-hued fog of fury. I do not know how many times I struck him, or how well, or what words I ranted, or whether he had tried to wrest the knife away from me before I realized I was stabbing at nothing but the air. I blinked, hearing running footsteps, and my vision cleared so that I saw him clutching himself as he fled. Blood spotted the cobbles, and on the cold street Lady Cecily lay crumpled amidst her rags, white and still. Heavens have mercy! I had been saved by a high whalebone-ribbed collar the night I was attacked, but she wore none. She sprawled as if dead. Please no, I whispered, starting to shake all over as wrath gave way to dread. My hand shook without conscious thought, and I returned my dagger all bloody to its sheath in my busk. Please, I begged the knight as I knelt behind Lady Cecily, for in that moment I realized how deep the garrote had bitten into her delicate neck. And confound my hands, they trembled so badly that I could barely grasp the ugly thing, taking dreadful moments to loosen it. Frantically I felt at her throat for breath, at her wrist for pulse. I thought I felt a flutter of something, perhaps, but I quaked so that I could not tell for sure. Help. I needed help for the lady. And by a strange, maybe even providential chance, I knew where help might be found. Close at hand. Lifting the lady's limp form in my arms, I staggered to my feet, blundering towards a modest office and residence nearby. Closed, shuttered, and locked now, of course, for the night, but I stumbled up the white stone steps to the door, leaned there, and freeing one hand, I plied the brass knocker with all of my remaining strength. I kept up my frenzied knocking until the door actually opened. Still clinging to the stricken lady, I staggered, nearly falling into the front hallway. I only glimpsed at the very startled parlour-maid who'd let me in, for my panicked gaze had fixed on the equally startled gentleman emerging from the library with an after-dinner drink in his hand. Dr. Watson. I tried to say something to him, but choked on my own words, for right beside the good doctor walked his dinner companion and friend, my brother, Sherlock Holmes. That's the end of chapter 17. Or, sorry, 16. That's the end of chapter 16. Oh, you can take me out to dinner, Kate. Anytime. Anytime. She's more okay than Graham. Oh, it's so true. So true. The riffraff and the street rats stealing bread. Grandma! Tori's gonna cry when Gran dies in that game. It's just gonna be all the tears. So, did you guys think she was gonna die? She might. She might still die. Got one more chapter. Alrighty, we're gonna press. Chapter the 17th. Luckily, it was scarcely possible for me to react with more panic than I was already revealing, in my agitation of manner, for my face remained hidden by its dense black veil. And luckily, Sherlock Holmes's attention, like Dr. Watson's, was all taken up by the limp, very possibly lifeless girl sagging against me. Good heavens! Striding to me, Watson picked up Lady Cecily as if cradling the child. Nearly running, he carried her to the warm, well-lighted library. Following, my brother asked, "Is she breathing?" "Only just." She was alive, then. Hearing that, suddenly I felt lightheaded, indeed light of person, as if I might float, such a burden had been lifted off me. Dr. Watson laid the lady upon a leather davenport and applied his trained fingers to her wrist. Her pulse is weak. Brandy, Holmes. My brother was already striding towards the decanter, his back to me. The parlour-maid stood at some distance from me, clinging to the stairway newel as if she might faint. At that moment I could have simply turned, stepped out of the door, and slipped away into the darkness. I knew I should. There was no reason for me to stay. Lady Cecily would be well cared for. And there was every reason for me to leave Dr. Watson's attention and... And there was every reason for me to leave, period. Dr. Watson's attention might turn towards me, or the attention of his friend might do the same. My brother might recognize me. Moreover, at any moment Lady Cecily might regain her senses and say my name, which like a fool I had told her. Every nerve told me to flee. Yet instead, like an overlarge black moth drawn to a candle flame, I ghosted into the room with the others. With my brother. With the girl whom I wanted to be my friend. And with the fatherly Dr. Watson. Kneeling beside his patient, removing the cord from her neck, Watson exclaimed, "What sort of brute would garrote a beggar girl?" He called towards the entryway. "Rose, send for the police." Rose, I suppose, was the parlour maid, who might or might not feel well enough to respond. At Watson's elbow now with the brandy, Holmes said, "That's no beggar girl. Look at her teeth. All her life they've been well cared for." Administering the brandy, Watson did not immediately answer. "Look at her skin. Her features. Our guest is a lady." "If that's so, then what is she doing in such—" My imperious brother interrupted. "There is some mystery here." Hawk-like he turned on me, where I stood just within the library door, perhaps 10 feet from him. His steel-grey eyes fixed upon my much besmirched mantle, and his eyebrows shot up. "Is that blood?" I supposed that on my black clothing, all draggled by the muck of the street and in the gaslight, it was hard to tell what the wet stains were. "Blood?" Glancing up to see what Holmes was talking about, Dr. Watson also looked at me, then stood up quite suddenly. "Madam, are you injured?" Actually, I was hurt, my face bruised and aching from Alexander Finch's blow, but I shook my veiled head to indicate the negative. Again, I should have fled, but some pernicious yearning kept me where I was. Dr. Watson asked, "Why do you not speak?" "The sister of the streets is a mute, I have heard," Holmes told his friend, without looking at him. His grey grays remained nailed upon me as if he might thereby pierce my veil. "Or perhaps she is hurt and in shock," said Dr. Watson. "That does look like blood. Quantities of blood." "We lack data to arrive at any conclusion," said Holmes, and he started towards me to investigate. I whipped out my dagger. My brother stopped where he stood, perhaps 6 feet from me. It seems like our power just flickered. Am I still alive? Oh, drive safe, Riddy. Oh, that was thunder. Yeah, it's coming up this way, Rob. Okay, cool. Alright. But I'm still going, right? Okay, cool. That's the important thing. I'll continue then. My brother stopped where he stood, perhaps 6 feet from me. Everything seemed to stop in that moment as I threatened with my razor-sharp, honed steel blade. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to stop. I remember utter stillness, utter silence. The knife's silver-colored tip wore a red veil. The silence stretched, then broke. Watson broke it, his voice a bit strained. "I think it's not her blood, Holmes." "I would quite like to know whose," murmured the great detective. Then he spread his hands toward me in a spelled Pacific. Pacific. I guess you say Pacific, even though it's like pacifist. In a pacific yet quelling gesture, and he started to protest or cajole. "My dear sister." His dear sister. Those words, how oddly they affected me. "Do not condescend to me." I hardly recognized my own quite distinctive aristocratic voice bursting forth as it should never have done from under the veil. "I am in no need of assistance. On the other hand, Lady Cecily," with a jerk of my weapon I indicated the still unconscious girl lying on the sofa, "daughter of Sir Eustace Alastair, requires more care than I can give her." Although she was unlikely ever to receive it, care for her alienization of the psyche, her secret left-handed self, but if the police were on the way, there was no time to explain, I continued. "The villain who garroted her." His voice, glassy and cracked with incredulity, I suppose, my brother interrupted. "Enola?" His face had gone as keen and white as fine carving in marble. "Do not speak. Listen." There was no time for melodrama. I had to finish what I was saying. "Please attend to what I am telling you. The garroter is Alexander Finch, a youth who had once contrived to befriend the lady, and who has since mesmerized and kidnapped her. He masquerades as a Labour platform trumpet named Cameron Shaw. You will find his disguise in the street, and you are likely to find him at some surgeon or hospital with the marks of my knife on him." I could only hope that Dr. Watson had taken in most of this, for my brother evidently had not. He responded in much the same way as before. "Enola?" Having done all I could for the interests of justice, I softened my voice considerably. "My dear brother, please put your mind at ease concerning me. The day I took my cipher booklet out of your desk, did you by chance find a handkerchief belonging to me wrapped around a slice of onion?" I wished to convince him, you see, that my weeping had been an actor's performance, to reassure him. But he seemed not to follow my meaning at all. He only leaned towards me, his alabaster features vibrant with barely constrained emotions. "Enola, you must be sensible. You cannot continue in this foolish fashion, alone, unguided, wayward." Dr. Watson, gawking, seemed about to say something, as I dreaded that he should, but movement and a groan from Lady Cecily claimed his attention. She would recover. With a pang my heart let go of hopes for friendship. I had to settle for knowing she was safe now, and hoping she would eventually find freedom, as I had. Sherlock, I told my brother earnestly and quietly, I am doing very well on my own, thank you. Do you mean to tell me that you are all right? Quite so. Although, I remarked, a bit worried about our mother, as I have not yet heard from her in response to my most recent message. Tell me where she is then, and I will find her. Ah, he did not, after all, know everything. I replied, such would not be her wish no matter what extremity. And you, Enola? You insist on following her wilful example? You shall come to harm. My dear Sherlock, I told him almost tenderly, although I still held my dagger at the ready to keep him from approaching me. The greatest harm I could possibly suffer would be to lose my liberty to be forced into a conventional life of domestic duties and matrimony. You cannot possibly mean that. Every decent woman's calling is to take her proper place in society. He stepped towards me. I stopped him with a gesture of my weapon. No nearer, I warn you. In fact, I could never have hurt him, but he knew me so imperfectly that he halted. I cannot believe a word you are saying, my dear sister, he all but begged. Let me see your face. It was a little enough for him to ask, but I could not allow it. Dr. Watson might recognize Ivy Michelle in me. No. In the same moment I realized it was a ploy to take my attention away from my weapon. One uses two hands to raise a veil. No, my oh-so-clever brother, I think not. Still my voice remained gentle. I hoped he could hear in its tone my affection for him. I am going now. Please convey my good wishes to our brother Mycroft. A considerable thumping commotion sounded behind me. At once, lowering my knife to hide it in the folds of my mantle, I turned and sped out of the library, just as the parlour-maid and a constable blundered in at the front door. Stop her! My brother cried, but the parlour-maid, quite excited, was tugging at the constable towards where Lady Cecily lay, and before Sherlock Holmes could shout again, I had darted out of the door, running down the street. Stop her! My brother's voice rang like a bugle in the night. I heard pursuit behind me, the constable's thudding footfalls and my brother's lighter, longer stride. Like a hunted animal, I kept an iron railing and thumped down to a servant's basement area. Fleeing for my very life, loss of freedom would have killed me. I sped out to the back way, and so into the maze of tool sheds, workshops, and animal pens behind the houses. As I paused inside a carriage house to catch both my breath and my wits, I heard my brother speaking with the constable, then heard the latter halt to the call box on the street corner. Oh, how lovely! Within moments he would have every policeman in London on the lookout for me. Bring me a lantern, my brother's commanding voice ordered someone. She can't have gone far. I ran out at the other end of the carriage house, and onward, blindly, my thoughts frantic, despairing. Sherlock Holmes would search every horse stall, every cow shed, every shadow in the mews, while on the streets police patrolled. There was no place to hide. My black mantle, my cowl and veil, my habit, they marked me, now and forevermore. I had to get rid of them. But then what? Run home in my red flannel underpinnings? In order to change my appearance and elude the pursuit, I needed a refuge. But where could I go, with every man's hand turned against me, and every woman's hand at the mercy of every man's? As I had chosen not to accept the lot of other girls, would it always be like this? Running, hiding, dodging, disguised? Enola? Alone? I did not allow myself to answer that question, forcing myself to think instead what to do for the moment, as I emerged into a cobbled thoroughfare and darted across it, recognizing it as somewhere I had been before. Baker Street. Of course. My feet apparently possessing more intelligence than my head had carried me to the one place where my brother was least likely to search for me. With energy born of new hope, I sped towards number 221, then darted behind the house. In the small backyard, as I had noticed on my previous visit, stood a single tree of the obliging knobby sort known as London plane. Up its excellent trunk I swarmed with no trouble at all, and after that it took only a slight maneuvering to climb onto the roof of the kitchen porch. None too soon. As I sat panting, two constables passed on the opposite pavements of Baker Street, the one calling to the other, "Gels in a nun's gear, sergeant says." "With a knife, what I hear, and irrational," replied the other. "Odd to believe, but they say dangerous." "Hysteria," said the other sagely. "Common affliction of her sex." Common affliction of her sex. That's what it means. Excuse me. Graham.
Do you need my flip-flops? back and forth food monster track table with table on top of the house. Yeah, I'll take care of that. Well, we didn't move the table.
Yeah, I know, we should have just done that. We can just put it up on tomorrow. Sorry, everything's fine. Sorry, I didn't mean to worry you guys. Sorry, I had to, go take care of some stuff. We're getting pretty bad rain, so I had to get some stuff out of the rain real quick. And I saw my text a little too late. Okay. We're good. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, everything's fine. I'm sorry to interrupt I was on a roll! Okay, so she's climbing up the tree. I wondered whether that was what Sherlock thought of me. Irrational. Hysterical. Yes, it probably was. After removing my boots as to be more silent, I padded across the roof to the window. I judged must lead to my brother's chamber. Gently I tried it, and it opened quite easily. As I expected, it was not snibbed. My brother was, after all, still my mother's son, and a healthful sleeper, one who let the fresh air in at night. Slipping inside and closing... Graham, did you see that? Sorry. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, thanks. Sorry. There's a lot of stuff on our porch we're trying to keep dry out of the rain. Slipping inside and closing the window behind me, already I was planning how I would search his wardrobe for something else to wear. I knew he kept many disguises. He even at times passed himself off as an old woman. A skirt, a shawl, and a hat of some sort would be all I needed. Then I would wait and rest until I heard the door opening downstairs before I slipped out the way I had come. I knew I must never again disguise myself as the Sister of Charity. I wondered whether it would be still safe to disguise myself as Ivy Michelle. Perhaps not. Holmes and Watson would surely discuss the night's event, and Watson might confess his visit to Dr. Ragaston now. I wondered whether I would ever see Lady Cecily again. Probably not. The only way for me to be safe and free was to be what my name decreed to me, Enola, alone. As I placed fresh fuel on the hearth fire of 221 Baker Street, I felt all the pain of that thought, but also some solace, whether he knew it or not, and whether he liked it or not. My brother Sherlock was giving me such shelter as family might offer. He was giving me refuge. That's the end of chapter 17. Sorry, I'm going to go back and read what you guys are talking about. We catch up. Oh, death of Gran. It's a part of life, Tori. Everybody dies. Someday. Oh, thanks for coming, Susan. I hope you have a good night. Or day, whatever time it is in Australia. Oh, thanks, Tori. Alrighty. I know, I'm a pretty speedy reader sometimes, so I'm sorry if you can't understand what I'm saying. If you can't, please stop me, because that kind of defeats the whole purpose of reading a book aloud, if nobody can understand you. Alright, the epilogue. Still in the chill of winter, February, 1889. At dawn, the great detective climbs the stairs to his rooms, his step uncharacteristically laden due to the fatigue and frustration of hours spent searching for a black butterfly that had paused for a few moments almost within his grasp before disappearing into the night, gone like a spirit. But his sister is no spirit, confound everything. She is a mere skinny broomstick of a girl unequipped with wings, and could not possibly have actually flown away from the stony face of London. Wherever could she have got to? Wherever could she have got to? Why could he not find her? Head and shoulders bowed under the weight of his failure, he enters his lodging and closes the door behind him. Odd. The sitting room is quite warm, as if someone has been keeping the fire going all night. But that cannot be. Yet it is. Glancing towards the hearth, he sees flames leaping merrily, and finds himself suddenly fully alert. For what intruder has entered here? But even as he turns up the gas to have a look about, he strongly suspects, even in advance of proof he knows, and a chagrin as keen as stiletto blade stabs his heart. He clenches his fist to keep from cursing aloud. In the fireplace he sees a substantial amount of charred black fabric, formerly a nun's habit, no doubt. He can expect to find some garments missing from his supply of disguises. His oh-so-clever sister has made her escape after spending the night hiding in his own rooms, the one place he had not thought to look for her. The nerve of that girl, he whispers between teeth set edge to edge. The impudence of the effrontery, the sheer unmitigated daring of her. But as he glances at the evidence that, once again, his sister has outsmarted him, his hands relax along with his mouth, his thin lips twitch into a smile, and he begins heartily and almost joyously to laugh. The following appears in the personal columns of the Pall Mall Gazette and other periodicals. Attention, my chrysanthemum. The second letter of innocence, twice the sixth of defiance, also its third and fourth, the second and third of departure, and twice the sixth of defiance again. Your Ivy. The sender judges it safe to use this code, referring quite simply to the daisy, the thistle, and the sweet pea, because on the desk of her beloved adversary, her brother, she has seen a paper bearing puzzled notations. Here's the, just to show you that it's listed out like that. That's just notations. So, question marks, true love, purity, thoughts, innocence, fidelity, departure, EITOFP, or AD, or E. How astonishing that the great detective has not broken this particular code, which to the girl seems the simplest. Yet if he had understood it, would he not be hot on the hunt for gypsies instead of lollygagging in London? So she sends her message, all is well, because she hopes she has guessed correctly, why she has not heard from her mother. The establishment of Dr. Ragaston, scientific praetorian, is closed until further notice. That is, until Dr. Ragaston can decide whether it is safe to go on. She wishes she could spend her now free time helping the destitute street dwellers of the East End, but she knows who will be watching for her there, even in the daytime. Consequently, until her bruised face is healed, and also until she can think what to do next, she keeps to her lodgings. She sees nothing in the newspapers of Lady Cecily, for that affair is well hushed up. Of Alexander Finch she only sees a few lines in the criminal docket reporting his arrest on the charge of assault with the intent to murder. But the periodicals do not remain entirely devoid of interest. Within a few days this remarkable communication appears in the agony columns of the Times, the Morning Post, the Evening Standard, and indeed all the daily newspapers. To E.H. Please be reasonable. Amnesty promised on our family honor, no questions asked. Please contact S.H. and M.H. It does not take the intended reader long to pen the reply to the Times, etc. It appears to the next day. To S.H. and M.H. Rot. E.H. If any decent woman's calling consisted of taking her proper place in society, husband and house plus voice lessons and a piano in the drawing room, then this particular woman to be prefers to remain indecent, or more accurately speaking, a disgrace to her family. A few days afterwards she finds this interesting message in the Pall Mall Gazette, personal columns. Right here. The youthful recipient deciphers this easily by reading it backwards while ignoring the spacing of the words. It affirms that her guess is correct as to why her mother did not answer her earlier plea. Mum will not, or cannot, come to her rescue. Ever. Yet Mum cannot directly refuse such an appeal. Therefore, silence is the only response that the eccentric woman had been able to muster. Until now. Smiling ruefully, the reader hears in the printed words a voice that had often told her as a child much the same. Fidelity, not a clinging vine, I knew you would stand tall. In other words, daughter, I knew you would do quite well on your own. All is well? I am a liar. All is not well. Not at all. But, decides the girl named for solitude, It will be. Someday. Because she will attend to it. The end. Yes, I am streaming. That's the end. That's the end of The Case of the Left-Handed Lady. Thank you, thank you. Appreciate you guys being here. Thank you very much. So I'm not sure when I'll stream the next one. The next book, I'll give you a little preview. I think it's this one. One moment. But these are out of order, that's why. Yeah, that's the last one. Alright, so the next one. Oh, hello! Welcome, you guys just caught the end. Sorry for that. So the next book, I'll be reading book 3. Let me confirm it real quick. Yep. Book 3 is, sorry, the glare. Look, you can see yourself. Is The Case of the Bizarre Bouquets. Which is book 3. I'll read you the inside cover. So, here's your little preview. Oh, you're welcome for reading. Yes. I did say hello. So, here's your little preview. It's just the inside jacket. Everyone knows Dr. Watson is Sherlock Holmes' right-hand man, so when he goes missing, it's a shock. Even Sherlock hasn't, well, the slightest clue as to where he could be. Enola is intrigued but weary. She's still hiding from her older brothers, and getting involved could be disastrous. But when a bizarre bouquet shows up at the Watson residence, full of whoa, they've broken the word up. Convolvulus, hawthorn, and white poppies, Enola must act. She dons her most discerning disguise yet to find the sender. And quickly, for Enola knows the blossoms symbolize death. Hold your breath, because Enola is about to take it away. The stakes are higher and deeper. The stakes are higher and the mystery deeper than ever before in this third installment of this Edgar Award-nominated, critically acclaimed series. So, this is the next book we will be reading, and it is brought to us by the Lorain Public Library from Lorain, Ohio. So, withdrawn from collection. So, there you go, guys. Thank you for coming in. I will leave you with a little bit of royalty-free music so YouTube doesn't mute my thing when I post this on YouTube, because it did that last time. And thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for supporting, your support. It is always, always, always very much appreciated. I will see you guys tomorrow at VBudKey's 12-hour commemorative stream. So please stop by tomorrow anytime between 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. EST, especially between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. EST, because she and I are going to be playing a really fun game that I've thought up and talked her into. So, anyways, thank you guys so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. It's going to be a great day, and you guys take care of yourselves. Please be safe if you're in this weather. Be safe. Have a good night. See you later. Ooh, wrong one.